I want to give you a summary of yesterday and today's court proceedings in the Julian Assange extradition hearing. So yesterday, September 23rd, right? This is day 12 of the hearing. And the first expert witness that we had was Quentin Deely. So let me show you his picture over here, right? So he's an expert in all things ADHD, autism, and he lectures over at King's College in London, right? So this is his domain. And he talks about how he diagnosed Julian Assange with Asperger's, essentially, right? ASD. So he did a 6-hour interview with Assange, some tests, and that's the diagnosis that he came up with. And Lewis from the prosecution, he tries to undermine the diagnosis. So just like he did the day before, on day 11 with Koppelman regarding depression, now he tried to do the same thing regarding Asperger's, okay? So when it comes to autism, he has an extremely draconian view of what autism is, and we'll get into that in a second, but it was really just dehumanizing it, what he did, and I don't like it at all, because, you already have a huge stigma surrounding mental health, not just autism, depression, anxiety, everything. Mental health as a whole is really stigmatized in society, so there's already an uphill battle to be fought to destigmatize that in general. And the things that he was saying, I mean, it's just, it's really insulting to say the least. And you got to remember that Assange is watching this. So he's seeing people in court dissecting the most intricate private details of his life and his mental health. And it's just really, I mean, it's one thing normalizing talking about mental health. That's wonderful, but it's a completely different thing when you have a U.S. prosecutor. Well, okay, he's in the U.K., but he's acting on behalf of the DOJ. And this prosecutor is just saying, hurling dehumanizing stereotypes at you or about you in front of you in a public court. I mean, that's another thing. Okay, so, Quentin Deely. So he agreed with the depression diagnosis that Koppelman had talked about the day before, right? And he agreed. The main takeaway was that, yes, if Assange is extradited to the US, he is at a higher risk of committing suicide. So that's just from having depression, a very moderate to severe depression, okay? And you must understand why we're talking about autism, why it's being brought into here. It adds to it. Okay, so if you have Asperger's, you have a higher risk of committing suicide, okay? And that on top of the depression and being extradited, I mean, it's really putting you at a high risk. So that is the point here. So while this is very personal and it's very private to talk about this, at the same time, it has to be talked about because you need to understand that under Section 91 of the Extradition Act, if you can prove to the court, which is what the defense is trying to do, if you can prove to the court that the extradition is going to place the prisoner in grave peril and it's going to put their life in danger, which is the case if you have depression, if you have Asperger's and you're extradited into a supermax prison, yeah, and you're placed in these inhumane conditions, that's definitely going to increase your risk of suicide. And that's why this needs to be argued in court. And I'd like to point out to you as well that this has been successfully argued in court in the past. So we talked about Gary McKinnon on the show. I did an impromptu segment on him a month ago or something. I still need to upload that for you. But I just want to play you very quickly. This is back from 2012 when Theresa May, she was the Home Secretary at the time. So she withdrew the extradition to the US. Let me play you the clip.
Legal advice. After careful consideration of all of the relevant material, I have concluded that Mr. McKinnon's extradition would give rise to such a high risk of him ending his life that a decision to extradite would be incompatible with Mr. McKinnon's human rights. I have therefore withdrawn the extradition order against Mr. McKinnon. It will now be for the Director of Public Prosecutions to decide whether Mr. McKinnon has a case to answer in a UK court. This has been a difficult and exceptional case, and I would like to pay tribute to all of the Home Office officials and lawyers who have worked on this case over the years.
Right? So that was back in 2012, and then in 2018, the same thing with Lori Love. They also withdrew his extradition based on Asperger's. So it has been successfully argued in court. And that's why it's important for the Assange legal team to do that. You know, what I really disliked was the prosecution. Lewis, his handling was just grotesque. I mean, he started saying things like, how is it? So he's cross-examining Dr. Dealey, and he's saying things to him like, how is it possible that he has autism? How is it possible that he has Asperger's if he's able to give these long, extensive talks? And then he has WikiLeaks that he's running, and he's doing that stuff on RT, and he's done all of these projects. Doesn't that show that he doesn't have Asperger's? Like, he thinks that having autism, he thinks that having Asperger's means you can't speak or that you can't function. That's such a draconian, neurotypical, primitive view. And he also went on to play this video from the Frontline Club of Assange as proof, right? So for Lewis, this is proof that he doesn't have autism. So let me show you this clip that he played, just a bit of it.
And to some degree, we have to fight against our own instincts to protect those types of sources. Now, we make a promise to sources who come through us, and I believe in the end that is our role, and that while we understand the benefit of information going out, that
I mean, I really don't understand what kind of point he was trying to drive home. It's just like, oh, you see, clearly he's able to give these long, extensive talks and discussions. Obviously, he doesn't have Asperger's. What? And then he was saying things like, he also, look, he has children and partners, like as if someone with autism can't have children and partners. What is this primitive crap? That's what you're hearing from the prosecution. Unbelievable. I mean, this is just basically insulting at this point. What makes Lewis qualified to dissect a medical diagnosis? He's a lawyer. He's not a doctor. Anyway, so he started saying crap like this, and Dealey countered by telling him, well, actually, this video that you're playing here, you know, Assange, he's very knowledgeable and knows exactly what he's talking about when it comes to politics, when it comes to this stuff, and that's his bread and butter. So, of course, he feels comfortable in the setting, and it's a very structured social setting. Where it's not like somewhere or something where he has to start reading social cues, and that's where you might see some characteristics rising, okay? So in this setting, that's actually completely in line with the diagnosis. That's the point that Dealey was trying to make. So, yeah, that's one thing. And you also have to understand that when it comes to the prison conditions, you know, once again, it's not just about in the UK, which is also a real risk if he stays in Belmarsh prison for anyone, I mean, but especially if you have depression and Asperger's, it can definitely add to it. But also if he's extradited to the US and he's placed under this administrative segregation or the SAMs, the special administrative measures, I mean, this is torture. I think anyone, even if you don't have depression and you don't have autism, you would end up being suicidal, right? Because that's how bad it is. Or you would develop depression being placed in those conditions. Sure. I mean, you're locked up 22 hours a day. You can't see anyone for a year. You know, you get 2 phone calls a month, and you haven't even been convicted of a crime yet. This is torture. It's definitely gonna give you and cause you extreme anxiety. So one thing that Dealey did is he cited these reports. So I linked them on Twitter if you want to go and read them, but they're from Cooper's. And, you know, he talks extensively about how damaging the U.S. prison system is, and the conditions that people are placed in are horrible. You know, you have a tiny fraction in the grand scheme of the prison population overall in the U.S. who are placed in solitary. But nonetheless, they make up half of all of prison suicides. That's how severe solitary confinement is. So the point, the big takeaway here was that, yes, not only will extradition itself and this entire persecution increase the risk of suicide, but moreover, being placed in solitary, what they call administrative segregation, it's still solitary, or under the SAMs, which are even more severe, it's definitely going to increase the risk of suicide. Okay, so this is really important to understand. That's why this needs to be argued in court so that the extradition can be blocked. So afterwards, after the lunch break, you had the first witness up until now that the prosecution have called, right? So they called their first witness to date. Let me show you his picture, right? So this guy teaches at Oxford. In his view, he doesn't think that Assange has severe depression. He thought that, oh, what Assange has, it's a mild depression. And he also doesn't think that the autism diagnosis is correct. So that was his view. And what was absolutely insane is that at first he didn't want to admit that solitary confinement and these harsh conditions in Alexandria Detention Center or ADX Florence, he didn't want to admit that it would severely impact Assange and that the risk of suicide would increase. So for him, his point was that a high suicide risk has to mean it's higher than the risk in the general prison population. That's what it means to him. That was absurd. And at the end, the defense got him to concede that, yeah, if Assange is sent to the US and he is placed in administrative segregation, yes, it would increase the risk of suicide. I mean, what are you talking about? Locked in a box for 22 hours? Yes, that's solitary confinement. And yes, that's going to impact someone's mental health. Even someone who's not dealing with mental illness is going to definitely suffer in those kinds of conditions. Come on. So, I mean, I already played this video to you from CNN where the former warden, Robert Hood, he said that it's much worse than death. It's worse than hell.
We're looking at people like Ramzi Youssef, the 1993 World Trade bomber. Timothy McVeigh was there. Nichols is still there. The shoe bomber, the Unabomber, you can go on and on. You're designing it so the inmates can't see the sky, intentionally. When it really hits you is that you're looking at the beauty of the Rocky Mountains in the backdrop. When you get inside, that's the last time you'll ever see it. As you're pulling up to this complex, there's shotguns in plain view, there's 9mm on this tear gas, they're going by 12 gun towers. And that's before you even say hello to anyone. You'll be in leg irons, a belly chain, handcuffs, and you're passing hundreds of cameras. It's almost all concrete. You're going to be in that box, these 84 square feet of room, most likely for the rest of your life, in my opinion, far much worse than death. You're looking at people like...
There you go, man. I mean, the former warden is telling you himself, this is no holiday. And ironically, I mean, I can't believe that they actually tried to do this, but ironically, Lewis starts reading from a statement by AOSA Kronberg where he describes this goddamn prison, ADX Florence, as something like a summer camp or a holiday resort or something. Oh, look, they have an arts and crafts program. What? Who the fuck cares? It's still a Supermax prison. What are you talking about? What is a journalist doing in a Supermax prison? Has the fucking planet gone nuts? I don't care if they have a fucking arts and crafts program. That's not the point here. You're sending someone who is innocent and is suffering also from mental illness into a Supermax federal prison on the other side of the goddamn ocean. Yes, it's going to increase the risk of suicide. It would with anyone. And Lewis, he starts reading from, oh, look, they have an arts and crafts program. What is going on? What is going on here? And saying things like, oh, yeah, you know, they can speak through the cell bars or something, and trying to make it out to be like it's not as severe as it sounds. Really? Really? You're going to act like this is not Julian Assange who's on trial, like we don't know the cables that WikiLeaks published, like we don't know what happens inside of US prisons, that you torture people. You're going to act like that didn't happen, like we're stupid or something. Unreal. The warden himself is telling you what it's like in there. You never see the sun again. Oh yeah, that sounds very humane, man. But don't worry, they have an arts and crafts program. I can't believe this. Like, it sounds so surreal. I feel like it's not even happening. I can't imagine what Assange is going through sitting there and listening to this crap. I can't imagine. I really can't. So that was the end of Fazel. And then afterwards we had a witness statement that was read, submitted into the record by the defense. So this was from Dr. Catherine Humphreys, okay? And essentially the point of this was to counter what Lewis had suggested the day before when he was cross-examining Koppelman. If you remember, he said that, oh, Assange is malingering and he's just pretending to have cognitive issues and stuff. No, turns out he was tested for this, and the anxiety, the heightened level of stress, it's definitely impacted his cognitive functions, as we know is the case with anyone, right? If you're suffering from heightened anxiety and depression, yes, it can impair your health. That's a really heartbreaking reality. And the fact that Lewis thinks he's qualified to deny that is absurd. So they submitted into the record this statement from Dr. Catherine Humphreys certifying that Assange was tested for this, and he's definitely not malingering and not making any of this up. It has definitely impacted his mental health. And then they had also a discussion, the defense and prosecution and the judge, they had a discussion about the closing arguments. So this is actually, again, extremely concerning. The judge was saying that she wants to be done with all of the witnesses by the end of next week. And you got to remember, man, they already lost a few days last week, and then had to wait 6 months since February to keep this hearing going. So she's cramming all of the witnesses into this limited amount of time, to the point that they're having to read some of the statements instead of actually bringing the witnesses in to testify. And then she's giving the prosecution hours to spend on one witness cross-examining them. And then now she's like, oh, you're out of time. You have until the end of next week, which is like 1 week left, essentially, right? And that's it. And the prosecution suggested, well, why not have written closing statements as well, closing arguments? And then she can make her decision. And she seems favorable to that idea, and she's going to give them a weekend. So the defense asked to have a month. Remember, she had no problem taking the superseding indictment from the prosecution at the last minute, and then Assange doesn't get any time to read it, analyze it, prepare a defense with his team. She denied their request to move the hearing until January, right? She has no problem taking that at the last minute. And once again, she gives the advantage to the prosecution. She's like, no, I'm not going to give the defense a month. I'm not going to give you guys a month to prepare closing arguments. You get a weekend. So week 5, that's when the closing statements have to be submitted. And I mean, not only is it a question of limiting the amount of time witnesses get to testify, limiting the amount of time they have to actually prepare these closing statements, it's also a question of having them in written form, and once again, preventing an open public hearing, going against this entire principle of open justice. Nah, this is not okay. I'm not the only one saying this. I think most people would agree. This judge, I think she already has her conclusion prepared. I think she had it prepared before the hearing even commenced. So that's day 12 for you. That's day 12, right? September 23rd. Now let us get into day 13. Once again, the majority of day 13 of today was based primarily on medical expert testimony, right? Because as I explained before, you need to argue in court under Section 91 of the Extradition Act that the prisoner is suffering from health condition, be it physical or mental, and that the extradition is going to worsen that and put their life in peril. Okay, so it's important to argue this. So let me just bring this up for you here. Right. There we go. So first witness that we had today, first expert witness that we had, Nigel Blackwood. Okay? He's the first to testify today, and he was called in by the prosecution. So He's the second expert witness to date that has been called by the prosecution. And once again, his whole purpose was to dispute the diagnoses of the other expert witnesses, of the other doctors, right? So once again, we have the dispute against depression. So saying that, yeah, maybe Assange is depression, but it's not as severe. It's a mild depression. How do you know that? You didn't spend time with him. What are you basing that off of? And what are they basing that off of? I'll tell you what, the prison reports, right? So you'll have Lewis read them, or go through these reports that Assange did, as we pointed out, on the way to court, these very brief ones, or when he talked to the prison shrink, Dr. Daly, or, you know, things that he's confided into with the prison staff. But these things are meaningless. So as Dr. Koppelman explained, anyone, not just Assange, but anyone who's in prison, usually, typically, they're not going to confide fully in a prison shrink or prison staff because they're scared of being thrown into suicide watch or placed under more restrictive detention, right? So you can't really base any of your conclusion or assessment off of that. And you're bringing in a guy who's not his primary psychiatrist. I don't know. So he said something which I found to be really, once again, extremely shocking to hear from a psychiatrist. Really neurotypical as hell. He's saying that he has a capacity to resist suicidal ideation. What? What does that mean? How does that, like, even if you want to play devil's advocate, even if you assume that's true, how do you know that extradition is not going to worsen that? You don't. All of the evidence that we have actually points to the contrary. It will worsen it. Extradition will definitely worsen someone's health and increase the risk of suicide. So this idea that, oh, Assange, he has the capacity to resist. Like, yeah, he has depression, but, you know, he's not doing that bad. Like, what the fuck do you need from him? He's got to be climbing up the walls for you to get it? This is ridiculous. This is so irresponsible coming from a psychiatrist, especially. Like, you would expect to hear that crap from the prosecution, from Lewis, who's not a doctor, who's not a psychiatrist, who has a vested interest in making sure that Assange is extradited. But to hear this from a shrink, man, that's shocking. I mean, this guy teaches at King's College. So I don't know what the hell that was from Blackwood. And I'm just shocked, honestly, to hear something like that. I really am. And I think anyone who knows anything about, mental health, about people who struggle with mental health, you would also be shocked by this. This makes no sense. I mean, it's like saying, oh yeah, someone with diabetes, they have the capacity to regulate their blood sugar. What the fuck are you saying? You don't know that. What does that mean? It could go, from one day to the next. They could be managing their depression, like you say. They might have the capacity to resist, and you don't know what's going to happen the next day. You don't know what's going to happen when they're extradited and put under SAMs or in solitary confinement. It's so irresponsible. It really is. And he said that Julian Assange, he's resourceful and resilient. What does that mean? I mean, I felt like it was a huge contradiction, which I pointed out when I was live tweeting. Like, you're saying that a political prisoner, or you know what, just the patient, doesn't have to be a political prisoner necessarily, but you're saying this patient who has depression and you recognize they have suicidal ideation is also resourceful? How is that a good combination? If you want to off yourself and you're resourceful, that's not a good combination. So I don't know what you're trying to say here. Nonetheless, it's completely nonsensical and irresponsible to say such a thing. It really is. And I felt like, and I'm not the only one who said this, but he was using Julian Assange's strength against him. Like, oh, you see, he hasn't done anything rash yet. That means he's fine. Just ignore it. What? How can you say that as a doctor? That's so irresponsible. It really is. And you got to understand something, man. Like, you're calling in expert witnesses to give their testimony based off of their experience, based off of the literature, based off of the science. I mean, this is a medical profession we're talking about. So it is very science-based, okay? We have data to go off of. Yes, Psychiatry is complicated, but we still have a lot of data to go off of. We still have a lot of examples. There's a lot of research that we can look at. What he's saying here is really grossly irresponsible. So I also posted here a bit about the Extradition Act, right? So Section 91, where you have to argue that there's a physical or mental condition. We'll get to physical in a second, but I also posted about Gary McKinnon, right? Pointed out that his extradition was blocked. We looked at that before. So, you know, the prosecution brought this guy to do two things, and the same thing, not just with Blackwood, but also yesterday with Fazel, right? So they're bringing in these guys to downplay the depression diagnosis and say, oh, it's just a mild depression. He has the capacity to resist suicidal ideation. Oh, he's resilient. Don't worry about it. They're bringing them in to not downplay, but also flat out deny the autism, the Asperger's diagnosis. So Blackwood, he said, yeah, he has some traits, but he's not over the line. And to downplay the risk of suicide, not just in the UK, but, not just in the US, but also in the UK, even in Belmarsh, by saying, look at the prison reports. There's nothing here in the prison reports. Yeah, because he's not going to confide in the prison authorities that he's feeling suicidal. You'll put him in suicide watch. And also downplay the prison conditions in the US, saying that, that's, the SAMs, that's just the worst case, and he's going to be fine, and it's not that bad. Even though, actually, Fazel ended up admitting he's not an expert on U.S. prisons, and he was basing his testimony off of what Kronberg, the goddamn prosecution, the guy who filed the affidavit, is saying. Of course he wrote that in the affidavit. It's nonsense. They also wrote that Assange is a fucking cyber criminal. You believe that too, you idiot? Oh, this is unbelievable. So, yeah, like I said, he was basing this off of the reports from Belmarsh prison. Again, those reports are not to be taken as accurate. Koppelman explained this before. And we'll see in a second, someone else will as well. They will corroborate that. So, that's what I was saying before over here. And, this thing, again, saying that there's nothing in Alexandria detention. Are you serious, man? So he's saying he was led to believe by the prosecution that there's no administrative segregation, which, as we've explained before, is akin to solitary confinement, right? Being locked up 22 hours a day. Chelsea Manning was placed there. Okay? Chelsea Manning was held there, and she was placed under ADSEG, administrative segregation. And you're locked up for 22 hours a day. And we saw also that they let you out when no other prisoners are out. So if you want to get fresh air or some exercise, if you're allowed to, that's in the future. You have to wait like till 3 a.m. or something when everybody else is sleeping. How is that humane? I put forward this point once again. These conditions are so messed up. You don't need to have depression or some underlying mental health condition to suffer and experience extreme anxiety and end up being depressed from them. You could send someone who's perfectly healthy into Alexandria detention or into ADX Florence, and motherfucker, best bet they're going to get anxiety and depression from this crap. It's torture. That's why. They wait years in there. Keep in mind, Alexandria Detention Center, this is pre-trial. You haven't even been convicted of a fucking crime. You don't have a record. Okay? Let me get that to sink in. You would be sent, God forbid, to the US, waiting for your trial, and you're still being treated like a terrorist. You're in solitary confinement. You don't even have a record yet. And you're going to come here and tell us that this is fine, that this is okay. As a doctor, no less. As a psychiatrist. Unbelievable. This is an insult to the profession and the science itself. Never mind Julian Assange who's sitting right there in front of you. So, it's so bad that, Chelsea Manning even tried to commit suicide on bail from Alexandria. So how can you tell us that it's okay? Oh, this is not acceptable. So Blackwood, he said that he's never visited U.S. prisons. Again, he's not an expert on this. And last week we had from Reprieve, Clive Stafford Smith. We also heard from Eric Lewis, who have been to these prisons. And we also had a written statement, by the way, from Andy Worthington, who's worked on Guantanamo. So these guys know exactly what these prisons and their conditions entail, and they made it extremely clear these conditions are absolutely inhumane, and you don't need to be a doctor to figure that one out. You really don't. Okay? They're inhumane, plain and simple. So Blackwood also admitted that he didn't actually read the defense submissions. So keep in mind, he read what Kronberg sent, AOSA Kronberg, but he didn't read what the defense had put forward, where they specifically outlined, hello, if you go to Alexandria Detention Center, you're going to be placed under ADSEG. And if Assange is extradited, he's going to be hit with not just ADSEG, but also special administrative measures, right? So they put all of this in here. Take a look. It's very clear. They made it extremely clear, both in the pretrial stage and post-trial, because of his political profile. So, again, this stuff with capacity to control is just ridiculous. I couldn't believe that. And Lewis, he also pointed to Maureen Baird's statement. I think I told you guys about that a few days ago as well. So this is when Koppelman was testifying. Yeah, so we looked at that, and she knows what she's talking about because, she was running prisons in the U.S. So she was in the Bureau of Prisons, and she has helped block an extradition, and she testified previously in the UK talking about how inhumane the conditions are and the special administrative measures. And basically, Lewis tried to say that, oh well, she was just talking about ADX Florence, the Supermax, after you get convicted. No, that's not true. That's not the only place that has SAMs. And moreover, it's not just about SAMs. Even if you want to play devil's advocate here and you say that, oh, it's just solitary under the protocol of administrative segregation, how does that make it any better? That's still inhumane. That's the whole goddamn point that we're trying to make here. That protocol alone is inhumane beyond belief. Never mind the fucking SAMs. This is a stupid point. This is missing the point completely and playing semantics here. Either of them is completely inhumane and is going to increase the risk of suicide. So afterwards, we had another expert witness, Dr. Sandra Crosby. So she is here. She was here to testify more about his physical health, but nonetheless, she also spoke to both. So she teaches at Boston University, and she's worked with or taken care rather, examined detainees at Guantanamo Bay, and she visited Assange multiple times. So she visited him when he was in the embassy, in the Ecuadorian embassy in 2017, and then she visited him twice in Belmarsh in 2019. So she said that even when she saw him back in the embassy, his health was already deteriorating because of being confined in that tiny space for so long. And, without going into too much detail, just the guy, for example, he had an issue with his tooth and he couldn't even get that checked out because he knew if he walks out the door, he's going to get arrested. Right? And Lewis, oh God, he's frustrating. He retorts, well, why didn't he go and get it checked out? He went to the embassy of his own will, of his own accord, didn't he? And she tells him, and this is brilliant because it's the truth. It's the truth. But the analogy was brilliant. She told him, well, the reason he didn't go, because she couldn't even convince him to go and get it checked out and get it fixed. She said, it's like somebody being chased by a madman with a knife or something, and then locking themselves indoors so they can't be hurt. And that's why Assange was in the embassy, right? It's like a flight response. So he knew that if he walks outside the door, he's going to be extradited. How the fuck can you argue that? You're literally in the courtroom with him, trying to send him to the U.S. You're proving his point in the flesh, and you're arguing like you don't know. like it's a hypothetical. How can you say this shit? You're literally the prosecutor. What the fuck are you talking about? You're prosecuting him to send him to the US and you're acting like you don't know why he wouldn't walk outside the goddamn embassy. What the fuck are you saying? Oh, this is so frustrating. Anyway, so she spoke to his PTSD, right? So we heard from this. We heard about this from Koppelman that there's PTSD, and she talked about his depression as well. So again, without going into too much detail, I'm just saying what's there. And her point was also that it's not just his mental health; it's also physical health that would deteriorate. That's completely understandable. And another thing is that she corroborated what Koppelman said, and this is very important to understand because the prosecution keep bringing up the prison reports as if these are set in stone. Oh, look at this report from 2019 where Assange spoke to the prison shrink and there was no mention of suicidal ideation. Clearly, he has no depression. No, that's not how it works, you idiot. Of course, he's not going to say that to the prison authorities because they're going to put him in suicide watch. They're going to throw him into, harsher, more restricted conditions. This is common. It's not just exclusive to him. This is a common occurrence, and that's what she said. Koppelman said that. Koppelman knew it twofold because not only is he a doctor, but he knew from taking care of Assange, being his psychiatrist, that those prison reports are not the full picture. He knew way more, okay? And Dr. Crosby corroborated that. She said, being a doctor, she knows this is very common, especially in prisons. The prisoners do not reveal the full extent of their suffering, of their anguish to the prison authorities out of fear. So there you go. So that was very important. And she said, once again, what we've heard from Dealey, from Koppelman, if Assange is extradited, he is at higher risk of committing suicide. There you go. I mean, how many doctors, how many shrinks do you need to hear this from? So, again, Lewis, he starts with his, let's attack the witness's integrity and record. And he starts asking her if she's sympathetic towards Assange and who paid for her trip. What? So she said, no, that's not a fair assessment, and she paid for her trip herself. He does this because he wants to diminish and denigrate and downplay their expert opinion by trying to paint them as being partial and biased in Assange's favor. And he also brought up the UN report, the torture report by Meltzer. So because that report, we looked at this a few days ago, right, on day 11, and he did this with Koppelman. He did the exact same thing. He said, oh, I see that, this is Lewis talking, the prosecution. Oh, I see that you cited the torture report by Meltzer. And do you think this is a fair, unbiased report? And he says that because there's some political language in it, right? There's a paragraph at the end that says, Meltzer has never seen so many nations ganging up on one person. And he's trying to trip them up and say, you cited this document, so you're also biased and your testimony can't be taken seriously. And Crosby, just like Koppelman, told the prosecution, yes, we used some of that report, but only the sections referring to Assange's health. None of the political language, nothing about nations ganging up on him and going after him. Just the part about showing levels of anxiety and psychological trauma, things like that. Just the medical sections. So this was really the most ridiculous one yet. Lewis asks Crosby if she's certified under Section 12 of the Mental Health Act. And then Fitzgerald from the defense objects and says, no foreigners are. What kind of a stupid question is that? Of course she's not certified under Section 12. Section 12 meant, this is, as far as my understanding goes, when you finish your training as a shrink and you're in the Royal Society of Psychiatrists, you get approved and then that's it. But this is for people who trained and practiced medicine and psychiatry in the UK. She's an American doctor. She doesn't practice medicine in the UK. How the fuck would she be certified under Section 12, you idiot? It's really making me angry. Like, what does this have to do with the heightened risk of suicide, with the inhumane prison conditions? Nothing. Nothing at all. And you keep in mind, Crosby, she was allowed to evaluate prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. I think she knows what she's doing. You think they just let in some random woman who does not have a degree in psychiatry? What are you trying to say here? I mean, if you're going to use that as a yardstick for who's a qualified psychiatrist, because they're not certified in all other 190 countries, you're going to run out of psychiatrists. Because guess what? They're not certified in every single country to practice medicine. What a stupid kind of question. It was just absurd. Anyway, so at the end, that was basically the end of Crosby's testimony. And then we had 2 written statements that were submitted into the record. These were read out by the defense. And these were not pertaining to Assange's mental health, but extremely important. I mean, just bombshell statements, which should, I mean, I am not sure, but I'm assuming that they were done in written form. So, you know, the judge is trying to get through the witness list as fast as possible. So let me show you. First one, this was from Christopher Butler. He runs Wayback Machine, or archive.org. And he said that archive.org still contains all the WikiLeaks publications, and the US government has never asked them to take them down, has never asked them to do anything at all, and never charged them with a crime. And here's the biggest bombshell of all. This is from John Young. He runs Cryptome, right? So we talked about Cryptome the other day. Sorry, that page jumped. There we go. So he confirmed that he published the unredacted cables before WikiLeaks. We know this because we talked about this the other day, right? You had Yoshimo sending it out on BitTorrent, and then Cryptome. The files were already online before WikiLeaks published them. That's what forced WikiLeaks' hand. Okay? And John Young is admitting to the court in a written statement, I published the unredacted cables. Here is the timestamp. And the US government has never tried to prosecute me and has never told me to take down the files. Isn't that weird? Isn't that odd? Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that bizarre? How peculiar. So there you go. There's a timestamp. 31st of August. It didn't even cross over into 1st September. I think he posted it the other day, and I made a joke. I was like, what time zone is it? Because there was some confusion in the court. They wasted like 15 minutes the other day trying to figure out the time zone with the tweets. So I made a joke about that because, you know, it showed us 1st of September in some countries, right? Because of the time zone difference. I think Cryptome is in New York. So in Europe, that would have been 1st of September already. And yeah, there you go. If you go and look at the Guardian article, if you go look at any kind of publication from the time, they're all dated 1st of September. So, I mean, I don't know what more you want. There's no confusion here. There's no confusion here. This is a personal statement admitting to it. He's saying it straight up. He published them before WikiLeaks. No one's prosecuted him or asked him to do anything about it. The only thing that's weird. I mean, let's be clear here. It doesn't matter who the fuck published them first. It's not a crime. It's still a journalistic activity. People still have a right to know what's in the unredacted cables. All these war crimes, all these torture programs, rendition. We already know the importance of these archives. We already had so many journalists. We had Daniel Ellsberg. We had Trevor Tim. We had so many people. We had Shankman talking about the importance of these archives. Khalid al-Masri, I mean, that guy was able to prove that he was tortured and got some form of compensation, albeit not enough. But nonetheless, he was able to substantiate it in court that he was tortured thanks to these documents. So they're of paramount importance here. So nonetheless, there's nothing wrong with having published them, but it's just to highlight the point. It's just to accentuate that the US are full of it, right? Because they're saying that they're going after Assange, specifically because of the unredacted cables, right? So they're lying. They say, oh, there's no redaction process. We proved that's a lie. We had Guts. We had people that worked directly with Assange in the redaction process talking about the redaction process. This was a thing. It was going on for a year. There was a clear intent to redact these cables. So they're lying about that. And then when they're, you know, they can't wiggle their way out of it, they say, oh, no, actually, he was the guy who published them online, and he gave out the location and amplified the leak on WikiLeaks. What are you talking about? He's not the guy who published it first. Why aren't you looking at crypto? I mean, you shouldn't, but why aren't you looking elsewhere? Why are you pointing your fingers at Julian Assange? So no matter what way you look at it, they're lying. They're lying about there being no redaction process. They're lying about the fact that WikiLeaks published first. And then when they couldn't ascertain that, they're like, oh, well, yeah, but even though he didn't publish first, he still amplified and brought attention to the archives by talking about it. Yeah, well, if he hadn't talked about it, you'd be whining why he didn't say anything and why he didn't condemn it. So you can't win with them. You can't win with the U.S., man. They're going to come up with lies regardless. So there you go. That was it. I know that was a lot of information. Yes, it's heavy. This stuff is heavy. But it's truly fascinating. And, I can imagine that these last 3 days, so today included, were extremely uncomfortable. Not just for Assange, but for his family. Thrusting all of this stuff into the public eye and in a public court. I mean, as public as it gets with all these restrictions. But talking about, as I said, there's nothing wrong with talking about mental health and destigmatizing that. But what's happening here with the prosecution labeling Asperger's and autism as some kind of disease where you can't function and you can't speak, and he has partners. Like, this is so primitive and insulting and draconian the way Lewis spoke about it. So that's insulting in of itself. And I can imagine that this was very, very uncomfortable and painful to have that in court. So there you go. But nonetheless, you got to understand the importance of why the defense even brought this up and are arguing and bringing in these experts like Koppelman, like Crosby, like Dealey, to underscore that, yes, the depression is real. There is suicidal ideation. Asperger's is real. That adds to the suicidal ideation. The risk of suicide is real even in the UK. The risk of suicide is going to get even worse in the US. The prison conditions are really bad in the US. They don't make any accommodation for people with mental health issues. So these points that have been raised in court are extremely important. And as we saw with Gary McKinnon, as we saw with Lori Love, their extraditions were blocked. And they both had Asperger's, okay? And we're also being indicted by the same Eastern District Court in Virginia, and also for cyber crimes, and also facing like a century in jail. I think Gary McKinnon was 70 years. So it can help, and I hope it works. I really hope that they're able to stop the extradition. But you got to keep in mind, there's so many things wrong with this case. I mean, just the fact that the legal counsel that Assange were spied on in the embassy, you should throw out the case. The fact it's a political trial, you should throw out the case. There's no way you can look at this thing and not find an enormous plot hole in it. Nothing. All of it from A to Z. And this is just the worst of it. The fact that he's suffering mentally and physically. Oh, man. So there you go. I just wanted to sum that up for you. I hope that was adequate and informative and encapsulated what happened in a concise manner that's digestible, because it is a lot to try and understand. I see, we got 200 people watching. That's amazing. Make sure that you hit the like button, because the YouTube algorithm does not like independent journalism, and it sure don't like talking about things like Assange. I saw Craig Murray, for example, former British ambassador, Twitter and Facebook, they've been, the traffic to his blog, to his website is gone way down. They've been blocking all sorts of traffic and interaction with his coverage of this. So it is very real. The censorship is definitely real. So please make sure you do that. It helps with the algorithm, leaving a comment, anything. So I'm going to take your questions if you have any. And if you found this coverage informative, please support the show if you can on PayPal, CashApp, Venmo, anything that's good for you, anything that works. And I can assure you, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep the coverage going. So if you have any questions, definitely shoot. I will answer them. And you can also sign up to support the show on Patreon. So I put the link to this live stream on there. You should have gotten a notification if you're signed up on there, right? There you go. Patreon.com/PapiChuliman. All of the links are in the chat. So let me see if you guys have any questions. Let me see if you have any questions. We got a super chat over here from Vero. Merci beaucoup. Says, thank you for being Julian's few outside voices. I've translated in French as much as I could. J'ai vu. Merci énormément parce que bon, j'ai écrit quelques trucs en français, mais pas tout ce que je poste. So I really appreciate that. It is important for people to know what's happening. I mean, we got Hoffman who's covering this in German. I think there's very few non-English people covering this. I mean, it's not like it's their fault. Trying to get in is hard enough, right? But so it is important to translate this and get the word out. So I appreciate that. Lily, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that. It means a lot. Let me see if you guys have any questions over here. I'm trying to zoom in and see if anything is... Oh, it says, I only joined Patreon to support your show. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I can promise you, you will not regret it. And this is going to good use. So Human ID says, will they make Lady Arbuthnot recuse herself rather? So if you guys have been paying attention to the conflict of interest, is putting it mildly, I mean, this is insane because before the hearing even started, we found out about this, right? And I think I first heard of it from Max Blumenthal or Ben Norton. Someone at the Grayzone posted it. So, you know, we know for a fact that the judge has, her husband is linked to a group that was publicly advocating against WikiLeaks. I mean, if that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. And when we're saying that, I mean, we didn't need that. We didn't need that to see from the proceedings that there's been a real effort on her part to restrict access to NGOs. We saw on the first day how she blocked 40 plus individuals and groups, observers, MEPs, from accessing the hearing. They had their access revoked and could not observe the trial. And, you know, the fact that this is a public court, this is the Old Bailey. This is, I mean, it's not just part of English history, but I mean, it's literally the central criminal court. You traditionally are able to just walk in and look what's going on and watch a trial. For hundreds of years, it's been that way. Okay, there's a pandemic, got to make some accommodations for that. I understand. Okay, so why not broadcast it? No, she won't. What? What happened to open justice? And then we saw Amnesty International and these journalist unions writing to demand and plead for some access after she revoked it. And she's like, no. What is this? I think I heard her briefly cite something about having more control over the courtroom as opposed to back in February where you had a rush of people, but that's nothing to do with it. You could still broadcast it on TV or online or make some kind of accommodation if you're really, really interested in the principle of open justice. What about that? No, that's not okay. So that at the very least should send off alarm bells. Never mind the fact that she knows for a fact he was spied on. She knows for a fact that he's suffering mentally and physically. She knows for a fact that this guy's a journalist. He was not, he didn't have any ill intent or seek to publish these cables unredacted, even if that's not even a crime, but even if you're going to go along that line of thinking, it's not true. So she has all this information at her disposal, and she still continues to proceed with the case. Even after the prosecution sent in a superseding indictment past the fucking deadline. I mean, what judge would do this? Have you ever heard of such a thing? No, just the fact that this thing is taking place indicates malice. Do you understand? Just the fact that it's fucking happening. So there you go. Anthony, thank you for the banana peel. I appreciate it. Staying consistent. Transparent Media Truth, thank you for the super chat. I see you. So I really appreciate all of the support. And man, I swear, it's like I'm saying with this case, there's no way you can look at it and not find a huge plot hole. I mean, it's absurd. It's really something. It's really something. Vegan Vero, merci. He says, didn't WikiLeaks expose the judge's husband's corruption? Therefore, she makes him pay. Yeah. So, like I said, he has ties to some group that was advocating against WikiLeaks. And that's a clear conflict of interest, to say the very least. But we didn't need to know that to see that this whole thing is a farce, to see that this whole trial is being conducted in a manner where it's not just that the evidence has been gathered through illegal spying, that the prisoner, the defendant, is being mistreated, but also that, you know, she's giving more time to the prosecution to cross-examine. You know, on average, you'll have, for example, like 10 minutes, 20 minutes of the defense going over questions with a witness that they called, right? And then cross-examination like 2 fucking hours sometimes. What? I mean, come on. You know, by all means cross-examine, but this is absurd. And then the fact that she won't give them time to prepare the closing. No, she wants written closing statements, and then on top of it, she gives them a weekend instead of a month. Dude, remember, who's going to suffer during that month the most? The defendant, Julian Assange. He's the one who has to go back to Belmarsh prison and ruminate and be stuck in there for an extra month. So it's not like they're doing this just to waste time or because they enjoy asking for more time. No, it's because they genuinely need it, and she won't accord them the most basic it's not even a privilege, but, you know, just of proceedings. And she also denied, as I said at the beginning of the hearing, the first week, the first day, she denied them the request to postpone it till January of 2021. So that was horrible. I mean, you also look at, I just wanted to mention something very quickly as well. You also look at the Human Rights Act, which is meant to implement the European Convention on Human Rights inside of the UK. So this is what Theresa May used to withdraw the extradition request for Gary McKinnon, okay? And we saw just 2 weeks ago that the Tory government are making plans to gut the Human Rights Act. And for many reasons. So not just would that be advantageous in this case with Assange, but also for war crimes. And I'm going to do a segment on that. If you saw on Twitter I posted about it, you'll know regarding that. So there you go. Let me end the stream right here so it's nice and concise. And then we'll be back in a few minutes and continue talking about other subjects that need coverage, okay? So we'll be back in a few, and thank you very much for tuning in and supporting the show on Patreon, PayPal, whatever it is, all right?